So again, just kind of a quick recap on the topics we've covered so far, right? So, how to set up the business from a structure standpoint, addressing those three kind of high level questions that we should ask ourselves about ownership, taxes, and liability related to the business structure, some of the driving force behind being an entrepreneur and what it means to kind of run your business. Last week, we talked quite a bit about finance, some accounting principles, and just some high-level overview of break-even analysis. This week, we're going to jump into start towards one of my favorite topics, which is marketing. So we're going to touch a little bit on branding here. We're going to talk about some imagery and things like that go with branding and why it's important for you from your practice standpoint. And then we're going to jump into the marketing strategy itself. And then next week, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and really go through a couple of exercises that's going to help you identify who your ideal customer is so we can be more successful with our marketing strategy. And then work through kind of how to develop a marketing budget and where to kind of put your spend, if you will, as far as trying to find and attract those customers. And that'll get us through next week. And then next week, I'll share with you where we're going to be at for the rest of the program. Okay. Ashanti, welcome. I will, if you type your email into the chat, I see it. I'll add you to the shared folder as well. So in the folder, you'll find all the materials that I cover in the class. So sometimes I play video links, sometimes I show PowerPoint presentations, sometimes we just chat, but you'll find all those resources in that folder broken down by week, as well as a link to the recorded session for the previous week for that week. So if you happen to miss a week or something along those lines, you'll be able to go back in there and do it. So good. And then I see that we've shared the link. So it should be open, kind of public. So you should be able to click on that link and see it. But I'll also add you to it as well. So that way you get any notifications if I make updates to it. So you should have access to it there. Great. And with that, I'll just kind of jump right into it here. So I'm going to share my screen. Whatever that is.
Start with why.
We assume even we know why we do what we do. But then how do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery, and this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operate in it. As it turns out, there's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way, and it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean, what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we're better. And we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one?
All right, what do we think? How many people have seen that before? Type yes or raise a hand. No, okay, so Jim, you haven't seen it before. Okay, great. So it's been around for a while, right? But it's a video I like to show for these types of classes because it's really important for people in the beginning to truly kind of understand some of the things that you need to do to, identify or communicate out your weakness, your differentiator, if you will. And that's part, it starts with that why, right? What makes you different? Many of you, as an example, are doing private practice in the therapy session, and maybe you're doing something that's very common, very mainstream, if you will, as far as the type of population or the the focus of what your therapy practice is. But there's something that's pulling you personally probably to that work in the first place, and we want that purpose and that communication to come out in your why. And Consuelo, like you said, it's clear and it's concise and to the point, right? What's more important, of course, is as you're building your business and potentially you're going to bring in more people within the organization or build up a practice that will have multiple providers within the practice. That why is really the driving force behind that organization, and it will help you attract employees and partners into the organization that also are aligned with your why. And it will also ultimately align to the customer base that you go after. And we'll talk more about that next week. But I like to start with that. Many of you have reached out to me in between the sessions, and I love that. So I encourage you to keep doing that. Some of you have actually taken a stab at trying to work on the business plan template that I put forward in week 1. And that's fantastic as well. And I'm happy to give you feedback on that, on any of those submissions that you do. Email them to me. I'm happy to provide you some feedback and keep you moving forward with that. But in that business plan, you'll notice a section that asks for your mission statement, right? And a mission statement, we might have touched on it a little bit last week, I think, but I'll just kind of recap it since we have a couple new people with us. The mission statement really is rooted in that why that Simon Sinek talks about in that video, right? What's really driving you behind there. But a mission statement's really simple, right? And I'm going to type it in here, and it should be one single sentence. Okay, and this is where people get confused. I think, back in the day, the concept was mission statements should be multiple pages long at the front end of your business plan or the front end of your annual report or something like that. And that's not really the case. A mission statement should be short and simple, one single sentence that simply identifies who you are, what you do, and who you do it for. Okay. I'm typing it in the chat here. Okay. One simple sentence that answers all three of those questions. And I'd like you to practice putting something together. And I feel like we may have done that at the end of the session last time, where this was potentially some of your homework. If anybody came back and wanted to share theirs, I'd be happy to kind of chat through it and work through that piece. But it's important for you because it keeps you aligned to what your mission and your vision is for the business itself. It clearly identifies the why, and it attracts the right type of people to you. So we want to start with that. So typically a mission statement, in my opinion, is one of the more, you know what I'm doing here? I just noticed, I'm going to resend this in there because I may have sent that chat to not everybody that I wanted to. There we go. The mission statement is one of the most critical pieces of it from a foundational aspect of it. A vision statement is typically something that's very broad in scope, very high achieving, you know, the sky's the limit type of reach. We may or may not ever get there in our lifetime towards building this practice, but it's certainly something worth striving for, right? So vision statements are extremely grand. And just sticking with the Apple example, Steve Jobs as an example, when he was creating Apple, his vision was, quote unquote, I want to make a ding in the universe, right? So something just very broad on that level. You want to be the best, you know, therapy practice in the Rocky Mountain region, something along those lines. And then we take, you know, strategic steps towards accomplishing that. And what does that mean to be the best practice in the Rocky Mountain region? Is it based on the number of clients that you see, the amount of revenue that you make, the population that you serve, right? So there's different categories there as far as how people would rate a level of success. None of them are wrong. It's just a matter of how you set that up and the steps and the strategies that you take in order to get there. But I want to just kind of separate that and explain that out to you, okay? So in your drive later today, I'm going to put a PowerPoint presentation in there on branding strategies. So, right, so the why behind it, the mission statement. Now let's develop a brand that will help us stand out and be recognized across the industry, across the region, whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish with that. But branding to me is one of the most critical aspects of building any type of business. Doesn't matter if it's a product business or a service business. Oftentimes people think of branding and they think, well, that's only relevant to physical product brands. And I would argue that for many, many reasons. I'll talk a little bit about them. But the PowerPoint presentation was put together by a friend of mine who is a branding consultant, does brilliant work for for-profit and nonprofit businesses, and does amazing stuff. Her contact information is at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. I'm happy to make a warm introduction to anybody who would like to connect with her further. But she's done a really nice job of painting a picture of what it means to build a brand, why it's important, and some of the steps that you need to take in order to do that. And branding is important because for a lot of different reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that it builds value within the organization itself. So when we talked a little bit about the finance piece last week, and we talked about ways to kind of build value within the business itself. And for many of you, as an example, building a private practice, if you ever wanted to, grow that business to a certain point and then potentially say sell it to another practice, another practitioner, another larger firm, whatever the case is, really what they're doing is they're buying what we call a book of business, right? Because you see typically patients in your environment. Oftentimes those patients are recurring patients or clients that you work with, and they pay you, sometimes a regular set fee on a monthly basis, and we can place a value on that. One of the things that branding does is it helps inflate that value because of the recognition piece of it. So another document that I'm going to put in your folder is from a company called Interbrand. And they are a consulting firm. They put out an annual report every year, and they're typically focused on large scale brands like Coca-Cola and Apple and Google and all these types of major brands. But there's some good nuggets of information in there about the context of branding and why it works. And to put that into perspective, again, on a large scale, so Coca-Cola, everybody's familiar with, they have an estimated $80 million of additional valuation in the company beyond the finances, beyond the revenues and the profits and all that kind of stuff, based on branding, right? Because it's such a recognizable brand. It's what we call intrinsic value, right? And it will help kind of boost and inflate the overall value and the perceived value of that company. And that's important because, even if you're just planning to stay as a solo practitioner doing your private practice, you want to ultimately be rewarded for the work that you did to build it to that level. Most people will not typically, see patients as an example just for the sake of seeing patients. And then, ride off into the sunset when they're done doing that. They worked really hard to build up that opportunity to be able to even see clients or patients. And we want to make sure that we are rewarded for that in the end. And in most cases, people are very aligned to the business and the practice that they built, and they want to see it kind of live on, right? So maybe it's, for some people, it's passing it on to a family member, or something like that. Or in some cases, in most cases, it's typically passing it on or selling it, merging it with another practice. And branding is an important element of that. And I don't want to dive too deeply into the branding because I could geek out on it for days and days, but just know that it's relatively important, right? And it's very common, as an example, for private practitioners to just name their practice after themselves, right? You worked really hard. Many cases, you went out and got a PhD or some type of, very high level of education and certifications that go along with the practice that you do. And you want to be recognized for that, right? So we call it alphabet soup. How many acronyms do you have at the end of your name? And then we compare to each other, right? But oftentimes you just build your practice based around your name, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I would just encourage you to work towards thinking about a name for your brand, your overall brand, that's easy to remember, right? And not necessarily tied to a specific name. Because again, if you bring in more practitioners as part of your practice to round out the services that you're offering and the supports that you offer for your clients, you don't want it to be tied to your name. Hey, I'm here to see Dr. M. I'm at Dr. M's practice, but you're seeing actually Dr. X as your actual therapist. That's, we kind of want to stick away from that a little bit. So always be thinking about long-term approach. Maybe right now you don't think that you want to build a practice beyond yourself and you just want to keep it as a solo practice. That's totally fine, but I would still encourage you to think about it on the big picture and the longer term. So from a branding perspective, right, come up with a name. I'll put a little article in the folder that just kind of some fun ways to think about naming businesses and things to think about if you're looking for something creative to do that. For therapists, as an example, or people doing stuff in the health and wellness space, as an example, oftentimes we'll see single, short, nice words that are easy to remember and reflect maybe in some other language the meaning of your practice, right? Whatever the practice is rooted in, what the why is behind your practice, and they're aligned in that way. And there's a lot of very nice imagery and things like that go with that can enhance that further as well. So be thinking about that. But I coach a lot of different entrepreneurs and they come up with names sometimes, and I think that's great, but I always try to think about it from the standpoint of how will people speak about it when they're not in your presence, right? Will they recall the name of the practice itself and do that? And oftentimes many of you will be working in areas that are sensitive in nature, right? People don't necessarily like to talk about the fact that they're seeing a therapist, or they don't like to talk about the fact that they're visiting a doctor or getting some type of care for themselves. I wish that was not true, but oftentimes people are that way about it, right? They don't want to publicly speak about it. So if they can say, you know, I'm at the name of some place as an example, when they're talking to their friends and family, it maybe softens that a little bit. So just be thinking about that. And then from a naming standpoint as well, I also, if you're in that process of picking a name for your business, I like you to look ahead as is a website available, you know, that domain address, is it available for the name that you're selecting? Are any social media channels that you might work with, like Facebook or Instagram or something like that, are they available in that name? And there's a cool resource called Busta Name, BUSTA name, .com. And it's really fun site to use. It's free. You go in there, you type in a bunch of words that are related to your why, your practice itself, and it will potentially make suggestions for you around naming. But what else it does that's really cool, and this works even if you already have a name and you want to type it in there and you haven't secured your domain names or your social media handles, is it will automatically scour the web and see if those handles are available across all those channels. So I came up with a business name. I'm going to call it xyz.com, and automatically the site will say the website domain is available as a .com, as a .org, as a .net, as a .co, and these social medias or handles are available, and it will make recommendations for you if the exact spelling of it is not the same. It will potentially tell you that there's some that are similar. Maybe you might consider doing that. So it's important step to do. It takes only minutes. And then that way you don't reach a frustration point when you're like, I thought really long and hard and I came up with this cool name, and now I registered it with the state of Colorado, and then I went out to buy the domain name and it's already taken. Right? So people get disappointed in that, but you can always be creative in that space. I don't feel that it's absolutely critical for your website name to perfectly align to your brand name. It's nice if it does, but I don't think it's a deal killer. If it's not, as long as it's in line with the mission and the why behind your business, and it speaks to what you do, I think it's okay. I would also encourage you to secure all the domain names that are available under that particular brand or whatever you're doing. So if the .com is available and the .net is available, and not typically a .org unless you're planning on doing a nonprofit or having a nonprofit arm of your business. We talked a little bit about that a couple of weeks ago. I would snatch all of those up because they're not very expensive. You can buy domain names probably for like $10 a year. They're not very expensive. And then you prevent anybody else from snagging them and creating a totally different business that uses the same name that's not even in your field. The other thing that's nice about it is that it helps with your search engine optimization. So SEO, you hear that frequently, to help drive people back to your traffic. So to your website. So when people are, looking on the internet and searching the internet for service providers in your field, the more domain names that you have that point back to your primary domain name will help rank you higher on the pages. SEO is an entirely different topic. We would need more time for that and a couple of extra weeks to do that. But it's something to be important just for you to think about. It's not something that's difficult for you to set up. It doesn't cost you anything to have it except for just registering those domain names. So I would always encourage people to add those extra domain names if you're available to do that. Okay. Okay, so we have a name, we have our why, we have our mission statement. Now it's time to attach some type of imagery, right, or a logo to your brand itself. And you can do all kinds of things as far as picking your, the image that you want to do, whether it's a lotus flower or something that's, related to nature or other aspects of your practice. I know that somebody in this group is doing equine therapy as an example, and maybe there's a nice image of something that's related to that field that you want aligned with your brand. Here's what I typically say to people: if you're not, most of us are not digital design experts or web designers or anything like that. typically speaking, you'll reach out to people that provide that type of service, and you'll pay a fee to have that work done. Here's what I'll say about that. So oftentimes in the creative space, people that are doing that type of work, they're brilliant at what they do, and they can produce some really great stuff. But you kind of get what you pay for in that space. So if you're trying to pinch pennies, and you're working with a digital designer, and you're paying them 25 or 50 bucks or something like that to design a logo for you, just expect that you're going to get likely quality that's aligned to that. But you might get something that's really great, and that's perfectly fine. The other thing is that you have to have a high level of patience, because creatives get to you when they get to you, kind of thing. And many of them are freelancing, so they're working on multiple projects at a time. And so just have some patience with that. Now, there's a ton of firms out there that will offer to do a branding package, right? And they do some really nice work. They sit down with you. They have a nice long interview process. They're approaching it from the standpoint of, we're going to make your brand look and feel just like the practice that you're trying to create is. And we're going to do everything. We're going to create your logo. We're going to create your website. We're going to create the look and feel on your social media handles and all that stuff. They do excellent work. They're also extremely expensive, right? So you're somewhere probably in the $10,000 to $25,000 range to work with a firm like that specializes in that piece of it. And that doesn't even include building out the website and doing those kinds of things. They're just simply building the brand, or what we might call a mood board, in there for you in regards to that. But again, if that's, if price is not the option, it's a very good high quality way to go, because you're going to get all the pieces and the elements of it that you need. Now, if you really wanted to go budget, you could go to a couple of sites. One is called guru.com, GURU.com. And one is, many of you probably heard, is called Fiverr, FIVVER, Fiverr. And those sites are basically, they're meeting places for you to be introduced to freelancers that are doing work in almost any field you can think of, but it's very common and popular for digital marketing stuff. And basically then what you do is you go on that site and you post what's called a job. And you say, hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me design my logo. And you'll get all these freelancers that will respond, and they'll say, I can do that logo for $25, and here's what you get. And you get this many, re-renders or edits, changes to the logo itself. And you get these file types, and you'll have it back in this time frame. And it's kind of a cool site, because both those sites kind of work almost identical and the same. But the sites are pretty cool because you get to see, it's like Amazon, right? You get to read customer reviews from people that have used those services before, and kind of get a better sense of the performance that you should expect from that freelancer. You'll also typically see a portfolio of their work, so you know the kind of work that they do. And it's kind of a cool site. So I've used them many times, more so oftentimes from my perspective, I'm like, I'm not really sure what I want it to look like yet. So I'm just going to have this conversation. I'm going to say a bunch of words that align to what the vision I have for what I'm trying to create, and see what they come back with. And I can get several different options in that space. So they're good for an initial phase. One thing is I like to tell people is that you don't have to feel like you're backed into a corner once you settle on a logo, right? It's very common for businesses to rebrand over time. That's typically something that happens many years out, right? 5 years out, as an example, the practice grows, we offer new services, we're going to rebrand it. That's very common for most businesses. So don't feel like you don't have to be married to it for life, kind of thing. But it's a good place to start, and I like imagery with that. Now, when you do get logos designed by anybody, as an example, it's really critical for you to make sure you get the proper file types, okay? And what I mean by that is that the designer will print a logo, design a logo for you, and then they'll send it to you, and you're going to open it. It might look like a JPEG file, where most of us are used to opening JPEG picture attachments to emails and those kinds of things. And you're going to see it and you're going to say, that looks great. I like it. Let's have it. You want to make sure that you get not only the JPEG file, but the PSD file, the GIF file, like any files that you can get. It's really critical for you to get the right types of files. And the most important files for you to get would be like a PSD file, which is a file type that's produced out of the most popular software or design tool, which is Adobe, right? So Photoshop or AI is another tool that they offer that a lot of designers use. And the reason why you want those file types is because they come in layers, right? So when you get a logo designed, they're designed in layers. You might have a circle that's got, 3 different colors in there, or words associated with it, or shading on one particular side of the outer circle. That's all created in separate layers in that software application. And then what happens is the designer does what they call flatten the image, or rasterizes the image so that it all becomes one image. And it helps with quality and your ability to use that across different platforms. But if you do not get the layered file type, you cannot make changes to that logo ever again. So if you get the logo and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, the shading's too much on that side. I don't think I like that amount of shading. I want to make that edit. You can't do that after it's been flattened. And so most designers will offer to give you basically all the different file types, right? So you'll see PSD, ESG, JPEG. You don't have to remember all the file types. Just remember to ask the designer to make sure you get a layered version of what you have. And then they'll also give you the JPEG files, and PNG files are really good because PNG files basically take your logo and then they erase the background. So many times you've seen logos that are not well designed and somebody wants to put it on a dark background, and their logo is a circle, but it's got a white rectangular box on the back side of it. That's because they're not using the right file type. And so a PNG file will erase that background. So then I can take that round circle logo and I can put it on any background, any image, any color, whatever, and there's no color difference or contrast behind that. And that's what we want. So you'll use different file types for different applications. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But when you think about how's the logo going to look on my website, how's it going to look on my business card, how's it going to look on a branded polo t-shirt, or some swag that I'm going to give away at an event or something like that, it's important for you to think about that application of it. And so that's why I always try to tell people about the file types, because they get really disappointed when they learn that they didn't get the right file types and now they can't make edits to that logo. You can find some designer that says, I'll recreate the logo for you. And in reality, what they're doing is they're literally tracing it on the computer using the software that they have, and they're rebuilding it from scratch. And that's going to be way more expensive than having a designer just design a logo for you from the start. So just make sure you get layered file types. Okay. I'll pause for just a second and see if anybody has additional questions on that topic. And then we're going to talk about some nerdy stuff, because as I mentioned, I'm a psychologist myself. My PhD is in industrial organizational psychology, which I always say is a fancy name for business. But most of my work, the field that I'm in, most of the people go on to become consultants, and they typically do a lot of coaching and consulting around leadership, employee development, different things like that. Or some of them go into fields like consumer behavior, which is really interesting and a strong focus for me. And they do things like, I'm going to show you this chart here. Again, I'm going to put this chart in your folder, and you can have access to it anytime you want. Here we go. So hopefully everybody can see this. I'll make it a little bit bigger if I can. It's kind of an odd size, so it's difficult to print out, but we'll try it. And so what I like to show, I like to hand out this chart just to kind of let people know. So when I say I'm an IO psychologist, oftentimes they go into a field of research, right? And so they want to know, how do people, in this case, how do people respond to certain colors, right? And they actually go into a lab and they expose people to different imagery and different things that will help them set up and design a study that they can actually measure that. And so in this particular case, some IO psychologists got together under consulting for marketing firms to say, how do people literally physically react to these types of colors and these different things? And so I'm not going to go into all these, but I'm going to just show you how to kind of use this chart. So the things I like to talk about in the beginning, colors, right? So the number one color for logos designs for branding is blue. And we'll learn a little bit more about that later on in this slide here. And then red is another popular color and things like that. What's really important for you to note on this slide is that this 95% right here. So 95% of all logos, right, all brands use 2 or less colors, right? So they're only using 1 or 2 colors in their brand. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is the primary reason why they do that is because that's the best design that you can come up with that translates well across all different mediums. So I use the example of your website, your business card, and your polo shirt. Having limited number of colors will translate better across those platforms. They're also best because when we look at our logos and our designs, we want to think about what do they look like in grayscale, right? So if we converted this to black and white, how is it going to look? Is the feeling, is the mood for the brand itself still going to live on even in this kind of black and white capacity? And that part's important. And so I think it's something for you to think about. Sometimes people have these great visions and it's going to have mountains and birds flying across and the green trees and all this different stuff. And, again, those are beautiful images, but do they make for a good brand? Probably not. And when you think of big brand companies and brands that you're familiar with, they're very simplistic, right? So again, sticking with the Apple concept, now you see an apple, the apple, doesn't say Apple next to it. It doesn't have anything else with it. It's typically in black and white or some kind of gray. You know automatically what it is, right? It's very clear. People understand it. Even if that's not a product you use, you know what it means and how it works. So it's just very simple in that capacity. So you want to make sure that you think about that. 41% of companies typically use text only. Okay, that's more common for a lot of businesses that what we would call B2B, right? They're business to business approaches. So they work, in enterprise software as an example, and branding, their logo, their brand, that kind of stuff is not as critical to them necessarily because they're directly selling to another entity. They're not trying to put it out there in the world and hope that people are attracted to it in that space. Okay. So it kind of continuing on then with this chart, the way you kind of read it, I think it's pretty cool that you have this kind of key up here that talks about different industries and where these colors would be relevant. And then you slide down here, the warmth of the logo itself. Is it warm? Is it cold? What kind of mood are you putting out based on that? And then you dive into the individual colors themselves. It gives you a brief description and it talks about literally how people physically react to this color, right? It evokes passion, visceral response. We see increases in heart rate. It makes your breathing heavy, and it activates the pituitary gland, right? So this is all researched in a lab. This is not just our guess of taking what we think happens. These are actually tested. So it's good for you to just kind of understand that. And many of us are familiar, why don't surgeons wear bright red gowns as part of the surgery process, right? Because it can be alarming and it sets people off in this type of space. And so we want colors that are calming and soothing to patients in that typical environment. You have your color code, right? What do we typically align this color with? Aggression, energy, it's provocative, right? The woman in the red dress type concept. It's attention grabbing. And so sometimes, depending on what we're building, we want that attention grabbing aspect of it, right? So maybe it's the main theme of our overall logo or brand, or maybe it's just a hint of it. because it grabs the attention and then it allows my viewer to draw their eye to the rest of the image or the rest of the brand that I want them to see. And so then you have a category here for what is it popular for, right? So these are the industry categories from up at the key at the top. They're good for this, maybe questionable for these industries, right? Medical is one that's, maybe we don't want a lot of red in our medical stuff. It's very unpopular for things like clothing, airline, right? Travel, because we don't want to think about our plane going down in a ball of fiery flame kind of thing. Most airlines coincidentally use blue, you see down here. So this is how you use this chart. You can go in here and understand, again, how people are kind of aligning, their understanding of the color and what it means to them, and how that aligns to what you're trying to create. So if I want to create a soothing private practice that's going to help people feel calm, I'm probably not going to put a lot of red in my logo, probably 0 red in my logo, right? If I want something that speaks to royalty, as an example, because I'm working with a high net worth population of individuals, as an example, purple might be something that I work into my logo, right? It's royalty, it's sophistication. There's a spirituality component to it. That might be something that's beneficial, right? And you see that it's popular for healthcare related stuff. A lot of yoga practices, health and wellness practices they have a lot of purple and different imagery aligned to that, right? Blue, hands down, is the most popular color because it's deemed to be a trustworthy and dependable feeling associated with that color. So you see the industries, again, that it's popular for. Also indicates that you're responsible as a business and as a practice. So something just to kind of to think about there. You get down here into browns and things like that, where people kind of align that to earth and nature and these kinds of things, and that's the type of feeling we want to create. Maybe you're creating a nutrition brand, right? Maybe you're a nutritionist as part of your practice, and you want to create some supplements or some things that go along with that. This might be a good color for you to consider for that type of practice, right? Black is very common, of course, for prestige. We've all seen the luxury car commercials, right? And those cars are always black in those commercials or those print ads. And it's always at night and the street's always dark and it's always wet because somehow it just rained, but the car is still untouched. So, just things to think about in that space. White is not very common to use because it's very difficult to translate across those different mediums, especially when you're taking different file types for your logo across a website, across your t-shirt, whatever the case is. Unless your background color is always going to be a color that complements that white, which is very hard to control. We don't see a lot of logos with colors in there. I'm just going to pop up and make sure I'm not missing any questions. If anybody has questions, no questions, then we will kind of move forward a little bit. So this is the branding presentation I talked about that I'm going to share. I'm not going to dive into the presentation. This was put together by my friend's company, 3-Story Design, but I just kind of want to walk you through it. What's the process? How do we come up with it? If we don't know what that's going to be, some evaluation. What I will say is, like, when you're designing logos, as an example, I would highly encourage you to get, if you're going to use like one of those relatively cheap sites like a Fiverr or Guru, work with like 3 or 4 designers, let them design something, purchase the item, purchase that logo, and share it with 20 people that you don't know, right? Not just your friends and family. You're going to ask your friends and family, but go talk to 20 people you don't know and just put the logos in front of them and say, what do you think? Tell me what you think about that. And get candid responses, right? Because they're going to say, well, oh, I see this logo and it makes me think, warm, comforting thoughts and feelings. Okay, cool. That's what I was going for, right? Or I don't get it. I can't tell what you do. Or, it makes me feel angry a little bit. Okay, that's not what I was going for. So noted, right? And maybe the logo that you come up with is primarily good, but it just needs a couple more tweaks. You can go back to the original designer typically and make some tweaks and then settle on a good logo. I had my logo for my company designed by a professional professional designer. She actually does a lot of work for Coca-Cola and really big brands. And she created a beautiful logo. I love it. But I still went out and paid, 25 bucks or something for three other designers to design me some logos. And I kept sharing my current logo, along with all these other designs to all these people. And it was kind of very clear and very unanimous which direction everybody was leaning, which is the logo that we settled on, and I love it. But I wanted to make sure it wasn't just my opinion, right? Because I'm attracting people that are not my friends and family to purchase my products and my services, and I want to make sure that it resonates with them as well. This is a nice visual image of a SWOT analysis. We don't really talk about that a ton in this class, but if you're not familiar with this term, you'll hear that you might hear people say, I did a SWOT analysis on my company. It simply means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A more modern version of that SWOT analysis will have a secondary T at the end of it, which we would call trends. So since most of you are working in the health and wellness space, or therapist as an example, health and wellness is a trend right now. And I will say that in a positive way, right? It should not be a trend right now, because it's just something that we should have been paying attention to for a long time now. But it's a trend, right? And there's so much more acceptance around the fact that, hey, we have to take care of ourselves. Versus, in the 80s, it was like pick yourself up by the bootstraps and rub some dirt on it and keep going, right? So there's starting to become more acceptance and more mainstream aspect to that. And I think that part is important. Sure. Yeah. And so this is a practice that we would go through, and you would say, what am I good at, right? We talked about this in week 1, like, what are your strengths? Focus on that, outsource the rest, right? Not just you as an individual or a business owner, but your practice. Like, what are you really good at? You might be doing family counseling, say, as an example, and there's a lot of family counselors out there. That's perfectly fine, but what are you really good at, right? I'm really good at this dynamic of the family and providing support and services in that way. Great, we list that out. What's your weakness? Well, I'm really focused on this, like a very small area, a niche or something like that, and I don't really do other services, right? You might have as an example, I work with a neuropsychologist, and they work primarily with aging populations, people that have had traumatic brain injury or suffering from dementia or Parkinson's, something like that. They're not working with teenagers who bump their head on the playground. Well, maybe teenagers don't play on playgrounds anymore, I don't know. But the point is they're not working with a young population, right? Is that a weakness? Not necessarily a weakness, but it's just highlighting the fact that this is an area that I don't focus on, right? In the private practice world. Where are your opportunities, right? So again, I'll just stick with that example. I work with aging populations. Where are the opportunities to connect with aging population? Who else is providing programming and services to support that group? What's happening, as far as where that population is headed? And I want to align to that, and why that's a good area of focus for me. That's why it's good for me to be in this particular therapy practice, because there's a lot of opportunities there. What are the threats? Well, there's, not making this up, there's more therapists graduating from college every day than there are a need for it. So maybe you have to fight harder to get customers in that case. What are those particular threats? Or healthcare in the United States is really struggling, and there's a risk every day that Medicare is not going to pay for mental health and wellness services. Those are potential threats. If we wanted to add that extra T, we'd be talking about things like, what are the trends? So sticking with the aging population, well, there's X number of people reaching the retirement age or reaching my demographic age bracket on an exponential rate every day, right? Because that's where we're at in our population cycle. Those would be a trend that I would be looking for and to kind of highlight in that space. Mission statements, again, I'm not going to go through this PowerPoint presentation in great detail, but I just want you to kind of understand the storytelling piece. We're going to get to that in the end of this class, and it's one of my favorite parts of the lecture. So, okay. Okay. Any questions so far? Well, if you have questions, type them away in the chat and we'll keep it going from that perspective. Okay. So we got some naming, we got some branding, we have some imagery to go with the work that we're doing. Now we're ready to go, right? We have some customers. You have to have your name and logo to get an LLC. No. So the question is, do you have to have a name and a logo to get an LLC? The answer is no. And you can go out right now, 10 minutes after this class, and register an LLC and under any name that you want, as long as it's available within that particular state. Pay $50 and never actually create a business from it. And it's very common that entrepreneurs, or you have an idea, you have a vision that you're going to create a business someday, and you get eager and you go out and you make that purchase, and then life gets in the way, or funding that you needed to move the business forward doesn't come through, or doesn't come through as quickly as you wanted it to, and the businesses sit there idle. I built a business, my business that I'm running right now. I registered it with the state of Colorado in 2017. I didn't start selling product to customers until July of 2019. So, it sat out there for a year and a half. I paid a $10 registration fee to do that. The logo didn't come about till late 2018. Website was built early 2019. Product wasn't finished yet. So that it's very common to do that. When you register a business name, just since you were on this topic a little bit, we talked about this. You do not have to, like if you're an LLC, if that's what you're going to register your business as, you do not have to have the acronym LLC as part of your business name. So my company is called Cool Skins. I could register it as Cool Skins, period. That's how customers will see it. That's how anybody who looks on the website will see it, even though it's registered as an LLC. Or I can do what I did, which is I've named it Cool Skins LLC. There's no wrong answer, and it's registered as Cool Skins LLC. But my brand, like the image for my brand, is simply Cool Skins. We don't put LLC next to the logo. We don't put it anywhere on our business card, on our website. The business structure is not something that's typically advertised, if you will, to the general population or the customer base, right? So you don't have to do that. So when you're building your brand and your logo, the other thing that you'll typically create is some kind of tagline. And the tagline can be incorporated as part of your logo, or it can be separate from your logo. So my tagline for Cool Skins is pet performance wear, and it's built into the logo and the design. So everywhere you see my logo, you'll always see the tagline pet performance wear. Now, for me, that was really important because the word Cool Skins and the way that it's spelled, people look at that and they go, what the heck is that? Right? And that's a little bit intentional, right? And that was part of my design, is to really be attention grabbing in that space. But then I add the tagline in there so people know what it is. And so your practice name might have something very fun and creative, but you're specialized in one particular area. So maybe you decide to put the tagline underneath it so that it identifies the population that you're trying to serve and or the services that you offer, so that people can follow through with that and say, oh, okay, I know. I've been looking for that type of practice, right? And draw them in a little bit tighter. Now, once you've created your brand, it's encouraged and very common for you then to go out and trademark that brand. Now, trademark is different from patents. Most of you probably are not creating something that would require a patent, but I would encourage you to trademark your brand. And that just is to protect you from anybody else who's creating something that looks and feels similar to what you're doing. A trademark, you can probably complete yourself. I've done many myself. They cost about $275. You fill out a form, you upload a copy of the image. You specifically talk about that image and that logo. It's exactly, this font style, it's this color code, it's all these, it has an I, the letter I is shaped like a thermometer, what has a gradient shading color of a blue to a red within the body of the thermometer, et cetera, right? So you clearly define it so that when somebody at the US Patent and Trade Office looks at it, they say, okay, this is unique enough and very clearly identifies what the unique characteristics of it are, so that nobody should be able to copy it if we trademark it. If it's vague, they'll reach back out to you and say, hey, this is not clear here. Please rewrite this section, or please, add a description here, whatever the case is. They're typically very good to work with you to make that happen. Now, you can brand your logo as well as your tagline together or separate, right? So sometimes you might create a tagline that has some unique factor to it, right? Maybe you spelled a word in the tagline a different way, or it's going to align to a bigger branding strategy that you have down the road. So you want to make the effort to trademark that. And again, you can do them together as one kind of logo, or you can do them separate. Each time you do a separate trademark, it's a separate $275. So just kind of keep that in mind. But that's relatively inexpensive compared to trying to get a patent, where you're probably going to pay an attorney tens of thousands of dollars to help you do a patent. And that's another process. But most of you, again, I don't think will be going down the road of patent work. But if you are, let me know and we can keep chatting about it. Now, the difference between trademark and copywriting is important, especially for most of you in the work that you're doing, because many of you will probably have some type of practice or templates or worksheets or elements that you want the customers to work through that's proprietary to you, that you created, that you invented based on your knowledge base and where you went to school and how you're specifically helping people, right? So I don't know if we have anybody in this group, but let's say in theory, I'm creating a private practice where I'm doing nutrition, right? I'm helping people get in a better mental space through nutrition. And so I'll meet with them initially, I consult with them, I learn about their habits and their practices, and I might make some recommendations for them to, practice doing this at home, right? And maybe part of that practice at home involves me handing them some worksheets that say, record what you're eating on a daily basis, and they're templates that say on Monday at 8 a.m. and at Tuesday at 5 p.m., et cetera. They're kind of poking around and looking at that, and you've built that yourself. We want to copyright that, right? That's not something typically that you'll trademark, but you want to copyright it. And that just means nobody else can take it and use it for their own purposes and duplicate it in that way. And so copywriting is protecting the content of that template, not necessarily branding it or trademarking it in some way. Now, some of you will do things where you have those worksheets like that, and we'll call it, Stevie's weekly nutrition calendar. We'll call it that, and it's got some unique spin in the name or something kitschy that typically ties back to your overall brand. We might trademark that. So I'll give you an example. I love this winery in California in Paso Robles. It's called Justin Winery, Justin. And they've, of course, branded and trademarked that name. But then they have all of their marketing strategy is tied to the word Justin or a portion of the word just. So they might say, hey, there's a wine tasting event just in time, right? Come to the cellar just to see what we're doing. There's a dinner just for members, right? And each one of those things, those categories that they've created, they trademark each one of those categories just to make sure nobody's kind of capturing that or taking that to some advantage. So again, with a lot of the work a lot of you are doing, you're going to have work that you've created that are worksheets or tools that your clients will use. You typically want to copyright those tools and or brand any things that you've kind of coined as a fun phrase around any of those tools or templates. So again, not to dive too deep into it. Again, I'm happy to work with all of you individually as you kind of go down that path. And if you get closer to doing any of that, I'm happy to keep those conversations going. So that's the primary difference between a brand, a trademark, a copyright, and a patent, right? Patents are typically used for physical things that we create, some kind of engineering design or something like that, something that's unique and proprietary in that way, that's very tangible. We don't normally patent things like our knowledge base or our practice that we're providing to clients. And we don't typically patent things like formulas that we use for skincare products or shampoos or anything like that, or coding that we use for building apps and different types of technology, because once you patent something, it becomes public information. And so we don't see a lot of patents in some sectors of tech, because once you attempt to patent that, say, code or that algorithm, it becomes public information. And just the nature of the algorithm itself is actually proprietary in nature. And in most cases, people can't decipher or dissect that or recreate that without knowing some of the strings and the elements of that. So there's certain areas that we don't patent things, but others that we do. Okay. All right, I'll pause a little bit, and then if there's questions, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to jump into marketing strategy. Okay. So when we talk about marketing, we're going to kind of talk at a high level about the 4 basic buckets of marketing. And these are typically referred to as the 4 Ps. And when we talk about the 4 Ps, we're talking about product, which includes services. So many of you are providing services. That is your product. Okay. Product, price, place, and promotion. The product is pretty straightforward. You're the subject matter expert on that particular topic. What is it that you're offering? If it's a service, what specifically are you offering, right? We provide therapy services for this particular population. This is where your mission statement comes in, right? This is who we are, what we do, and who we're doing it for. Pretty straightforward. Then we get into price. And price is a really fascinating topic. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different pricing structures or a couple of different pricing tiers, and then we'll kind of tie it back and relate it a little bit to the work that most of you are probably doing. So typically when we think of price, we start out with what we call entry-level pricing or discount pricing, not discount pricing, entry-level pricing or bottom line pricing. And so we call it entry-level pricing because a lot of businesses will just say, okay, I'm creating this thing. There's other people that do it. There's similar products to it. It's not 100% unique. So I have something to compare it against. And, there's 6 other competitors, say, in the space, and they all charge on average, this dollar amount, $6 for something. I'm going to charge $5 for my thing, my widget, whatever it is, because I want to steal more customers. I want to attract customers to me, and I'm just going to be the lowest price person in the area. I mean, in that sector, so that I can win more customers, right? I'm just going to beat everybody on price. That's entry-level pricing. We're entering the market. So we want to capture customers quickly, and we want to get our foothold in that market. Some markets, you hear the term, the barriers to entry, right? They're difficult to get into. There's only 2 or 3 people, organizations that work in that particular space, and they have all the market share. So how, I want to create a new beverage company. How am I going to go out and compete against Pepsi? That's something to think about. Those are a little bit different strategies and approaches there. But entry-level pricing gets us customers quickly. Typically speaking, that's the philosophy to it. Now, as a therapist, as an example, you might say, well, there's this many people within a 3-mile radius of where I'm going to set up my practice that are providing exactly the types of services that I'm doing. They charge on average, $150, $250 an hour. I'm going to charge $125, right? That's entry-level pricing. And you're going to go after potential clients that are they're price sensitive, right? They're going to look for the cheapest provider. It's a good way to acquire customers on the front end, but what do you think is potentially the risk of that pricing strategy in the long run? I'll pause for a minute, see if anybody's eager enough to type in the chat. Some of the challenges with entry-level pricing. Hard to raise prices, Charlie, yep, excellent. That's the biggest one, Charlie, and the rest of the group is raising the prices, so it's a good one. Shanti says, may not be viable for the business success. Good point, right? So we talked about break-even analysis last week, and that entry-level price, this is really difficult to do for early stage businesses because your cost to produce something typically, even if it's a service, is more expensive than somebody that's been doing it for a long time. Because as your business grows, as you've been doing it longer, you get more efficient at controlling costs. And so you might see a competitor out there offering something for, $6 in the example I gave, but that's probably the bottom line price that they can produce that product at. And that's why it's important for that. So that was a good one there, Shanti. So, and Charlie brings up one that's typically the most critical, is the ability to raise your prices, right? Deborah says, vulnerable to competitors with equal or lower price. Yep, it's true. You could be vulnerable to that competition because, again, typically speaking, those businesses have been around longer. They have bigger marketing budgets. They can do things to steal customers from you, even though you're trying to win on price. But the biggest challenge really lies in that ability to raise your prices. So we started this conversation with branding as the focus. And building a brand and brand loyalty, in my opinion, is one of the most critical aspects of building a business, because it costs you, and I've said this before, it costs you 7 times more money to acquire a new customer than it does to keep an existing one. And we want brand loyal customers. And the minute that you try to raise your prices, you're going to lose a large portion of your customer base, because they came to you from the standpoint of trying to find the cheapest price they could find for that product or service, which means they are not likely to ever be converted to brand loyal customers. They constantly will be looking for the cheapest price. So what I normally say to people is be really confident in what it is that you're providing. And next week, we're going to talk how you're going to identify who your ideal customer is, and be confident in what you charge for your products or your services. And if you do the exercise that we're going to do next week and really hone in and identify your ideal customer, you'll never lose a customer based on pricing. Okay. So that part's really important. And, it works great for some industries, right? I'm going to make tchotchke items that people buy for parties. And, I was at some event the other day, and there was like these little plastic hand clappers, right? Noisemaker kind of thing. That's an item that typically people are not going to be brand loyal to, period, right? So one-time use item, if that, and it's not something that they're going to be brand loyal to, regardless of how hard you work on it. Nobody ever goes out to buy those things and say, oh, but I really want the XYZ brand of the hand clapper. That's not really how it works. So those items is not as critical. And so entry-level pricing is typically the way to go with that. And again, if they're in that space and they've been in that space for a while, they're typically far exceeding their cost efficiencies at producing that than a new company coming into the space. So just something to be mindful of there. So beyond entry level pricing, then we have just kind of what we would call standard pricing, right? Or currently what the average is in the market. So again, from a therapy practice, the average is, $150 to $250 an hour. I'm going to price myself at $175, 182.50, right? Somewhere in the middle. And that's, so you're not necessarily going to try to compete directly on price. You just want to be right in the middle so that nobody, is scared off by the price point, or, you can sell them on other features and benefits of your practice than just price. Now, fun fact, from a psychological standpoint, this is probably not relevant to a ton of you, because you typically charge bigger dollar amounts and nice round numbers, right? Like $150 to $250 an hour, that's perfectly fine. But if you are selling things like physical products, or you have supplements or other things that maybe you're offering through your practice, right? Things that you want patients to go home with, and you're selling them and you have the ability to control those pricing, there's a psychological price structure that makes people think they're paying $1 less for an item versus $1 more for the item. And that price break is when we do an item and we do it for 0.95 cents. So I sell an item that's $60, but I'm going to list the price as $59.95. People will think they're paying $59 for that item. If you did it for $59.99, they're going to think they paid $60 for that item. It's just a little trick. It's a few pennies on your end, but psychologically, people will round down when the change on the end is a 0.95. right? Walmart, as an example, did a lot of studies. They sell a lot of products and they do 0.33 at the end of it, right? But again, they're typically lower priced items. They're one-offs. You know, again, it's not something I'm going to repeat and buy on a regular basis, something along those lines. So there's little tricks like that. There's different forums and groups that you can become a part of to learn some of these tricks and techniques. They're free to do, but there's some research in some of these areas. Most of you don't really need to dive into that, but just a little FYI. The next pricing tier up from that standard pricing. So we have entry level pricing, we have standard, and then we have what we would call premium pricing, right? Now, premium pricing is something that you're going to charge because you're offering typically something that's unique and specialized in a particular way, right? I'm the only neuropsychologist in a 60-mile radius. I can basically charge whatever I want, right? Because there's a high demand and a need for what it is that I'm creating, and I can charge that price point. Now, pricing for most of you is going to be based on how you're getting paid, right? So many of you will decide that you want to take health insurance as a way to provide services for the patients that you see, and the pricing is dictated by the insurance companies. I will speak candidly, this is an area of great frustration for a lot of the therapists that I work with, because insurance companies, well, they're insurance companies, and they, you might bill $250 an hour for your services, and the insurance company might say, we think $40 is good. And that's frustrating to you, doesn't value your time. But then the worst thing that happens is that then therapists stop seeing patients and they start spending their time on the phone arguing with insurance companies. That's not an effective use of your time. So then what happens is therapists have to make a decision, again, depends on the field in which you're in and the area of focus that you're doing, to take cash pay clients versus insurance-based clients. And most of you are probably aware that if you're in network with an insurance provider, you cannot charge a patient cash pay for services if you're in network with an insurance company that provides service to that client. So you have to be mindful of that and make sure that you're not stepping out of bounds there, because you don't want to get penalized for that. But if you're not in network with an insurance provider or insurance providers, you can charge cash pay. You can charge a patient whatever you want. You can provide a sliding scale pay structure, which is very common for health-related practices. And you might say, you can pay me on this, a rate based on what your income level is or what you can afford, kind of thing. And you have a minimum threshold and a maximum that you would charge potentially a client. And for most of you, you typically probably got into this area of work because your passion has drawn you there. You're deeply connected to the services that you provide. They've worked for you. They've worked for other family members or friends that you work with. And there's something that's drawing you there besides just trying to make money, right? But at the end of the day, we still need to make money so that we can keep the lights on and, afford to live and these kinds of things. And so oftentimes I'll coach therapists to stay out of network if you can avoid it, if you're providing a service that can benefit from that, and take cash pay clients. And the number one response I always get from therapists is, but the population that I like to work with can't afford my services. Perfectly fine. Structure your business in such a way that you can basically, like a lot of attorneys do, as an example, and do pro bono work, right? So I always say, give your time away for free on Fridays. Right? It could be any day of the week or any time that you choose to do it. But if you're feeling like you're bound or restricted by these insurance companies, give some serious thought and consideration to stepping out of those networks and working with patients that can pay you in a cash basis. Give your time and your expertise and your one-on-one services to the populations that are really speaking to you in a different capacity. We talked a little bit about this in the first week, and this is also common in your area of expertise for many of you, is you can create a nonprofit arm for your business that can go out and raise money and donations into the nonprofit arms to then, in essence, kind of provide scholarships to the populations that you want to work with that can't afford it. right? And so the nonprofit arm can then pay the for-profit arm to provide those services to those populations. So just be thinking about that. We can keep talking about it as we kind of progress throughout this class, but I don't want to dive too deep into it today. But so from a premium price standpoint, again, assuming that you're taking cash pay clients, or you're working in a field where insurance companies would typically pay 100% of whatever the billing is, and that happens, right? Again, just depends on the area that you're doing. Premium pricing is something that's typically warranted because you're doing something that's specialized in a particular field. There's not a lot of competition within a geographic region of where you're providing this from. Your bandwidth is limited, right? So many of the therapists that I work with, I've helped them build waiting lists of 3 months to see, clients have to wait 3 months to see their provider, which isn't great for the clients, but it's good from a business owner standpoint, right? As long as you're getting paid with the clients that you're seeing. A lot of you will do work that's specialized in the area of, say, forensics, and work with attorney firms that are bringing cases to court and those kinds of things. Some of you will do consulting work based on your background. Those types of services will typically generate pretty high dollar amounts for you, and they can be pretty lucrative in that way. And that's a good thing, right? I mean, if you need to get paid, there are good ways to do it. Some therapists that I work with don't like that type of work. They're nervous as heck to be on the stand in a court case, even though they're the smartest person in the room. They just get nervous and they don't want to be in that environment, so they don't pursue that. But that's an option. There's a lot of ways, and we'll talk about this more next week as we kind of get into strategies to actually acquire customers. But there's a lot of firms out there, right, that will look for therapists to provide testimonials or reviews of cases and different things like that based on their subject matter expertise. And they oftentimes will pay full price as well, even if you're taking insurance, across the board and all the different insurance providers. So there's a couple of different ways that you can balance out the pricing strategy. Normally, when you work with those outside groups like that, they're paying a premium price. And so you can say, my going rate basically to see patients is $175, but for you, kind attorney, I'm going to charge you $250 an hour, and they're going to pay it. So there's a little bit of premium price structure category in there. Now, normally, this is where I encourage most people to be, again, especially if you're offering a specialty product or service, right? So I make a product, it's on the very high end of similar products in the market space. My product is a premium product. My business card, as an example, is super thick. Every time somebody grabs a business card on an event, they're trying to separate it because they think it's multiple cards. And I say, no, that's one card. And they look at me funny and I say, well, I make a premium product. I have to have a premium business card to go with my premium brand, right? Just be confident in that space. I've never had one customer. I've never lost one customer because of pricing. Meaning I've never had a customer come look at my product and say, that's really cool, I want to buy this. How much is it? And I say, it's $80. And I've never had somebody say, ooh, that's too expensive, and walk away. But part of that's because I know who my customer base is. So we'll talk more about that next week. But premium pricing, as an example, is typically aligned to the next category, which is placement, right? So when we talk about place, I always use this example because people get it. Whether you drink alcohol or not, people understand the term. You've heard the term top shelf alcohol, right? It's top shelf. What does that typically mean? Well, it typically means literally it sits on the top shelf in a liquor store or wherever you can buy alcohol. And typically speaking, when we're in those physical locations and we're looking at products like alcohol, the one that sits on the top is the most expensive, and the one that sits on the bottom is the cheapest price, right? And the price varies as you go down and down and down on the list. Does that mean that the alcohol inside of that bottle is better than the alcohol that's in the middle shelf? Maybe, maybe not, right? It's a perceived value, right? And I say that, and I'll give you, this is a real world example. So back in the days in California, when I was a banker, I actually used to bank. I was the banker for the two gentlemen who originally created Costco. Back in the day, it was called Price Club. They created Costco. And so I got to learn all these really interesting, cool things about Costco and how it works and what makes them unique and how they just basically dominated in what it is that they do. Well, later on, I also got to become the banker for a company called Mass Marketing. And the company Mass Marketing created the brand Kirkland with inside Costco. So if any of you have ever shopped at Costco, you see a lot of Kirkland brand related products. That is a brand that was created specifically for Costco by this company called Mass Marketing. And what Mass Marketing does as a business is they consult with companies who sell items and they want to get into Costco, right? And so they consult them on how you sell to Costco and how you get into it, but they also created this brand. So back to my example with this perceived value based on pricing structure, top shelf alcohol. In California, you can buy alcohol inside of a regular Costco. Just they have aisles and aisles of wines and hard alcohols and beers and whatever. Here in Colorado, typically you're buying that alcohol outside of the store at another facility. Now I think you can buy beer and that kind of stuff. But the point is you just buy it inside the store in California. And they'll carry a brand in there called Belvedere vodka. Some people think it's great tasting vodka. It's fantastic. They sell it in these ridiculously huge bottles that make it difficult for people to, I mean, it's a ridiculously huge bottle, but it's really cheap in comparison to buying a standard bottle. Let's call it $40 at the liquor store. I can get this massively huge bottle at Costco for $42. So I feel like I'm getting a great deal. So I'm going to buy this ridiculously huge bottle of alcohol. And then right next to it is a bottle that looks exactly the same. The shape of the bottle, the frosting on the glass, everything is exactly the same, except for it says Kirkland brand on it. And it's $19 a bottle. What do you think most consumers will purchase between those two choices? They're sitting right next to each other on the shelf. Give me a guess. Type in the chat. I like your approach, Jim. So you'd go cheap. A majority of people will actually still choose the Belvedere vodka. And they choose it because that brand perception, right? And we see this in a lot of other industries, right? I'm a Coke person versus a Pepsi person. And I will not drink a Pepsi because Coke tastes way better, right? It's a similar product. There's a taste difference in that particular case, but people become really brand loyal. And they're going to be gravitated towards the more expensive bottle in the Costco setting because they still feel like they're getting a good deal on that bottle, even though it's more expensive than the one sitting next to them. Well, then they get really disappointed when I tell them to pick up the bottle of Kirkland vodka and turn it over. And on the back side of it, it says, distilled and bottled by Belvedere vodka. Then the question becomes, does the product taste different? Reality should tell us no, because it should, in theory, be the same product inside the bottle. Well, then the question becomes, well, why would Costco do that? Or more importantly, why would Belvedere agree to do that? They're already selling a bottle 2 times more expensive of the same liquid than the non-branded one. Why would they do that? The short answer is they do it because distribution. And Costco's huge, right? Tons of volume, tons of stuff going out the door. And I want to sell my product in Costco. Well, Costco says, we want you to sell your product in here too, but we also want you to make this product for us under our brand. And if you don't do it, you don't get to sell Belvedere in our store either. So now Belvedere gets a little bit of money from Costco to make the Kirkland brand version, and they still get to sell their product in there. So in essence, it's kind of a win-win for Belvedere. They just hope that no customers really truly understand that they're drinking the same product underneath a different brand. And so that ties into premium price strategies as well as placement, right? So when we talk about placement, we're talking about where is this product being offered. Many of you, as an example, will provide services 100% online, right? That's a placement strategy. Perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that strategy. Just know that that's your placement. It's online. Well, I do a hybrid where I see patients in my office in person, and I offer an online model. Those two different distribution channels. Well, I run workshops in addition to seeing patients one-on-one in my office. That's two different distribution channels. I could offer all three. I could do speaking engagements. That's another distribution channel for the services in what you're offering. And most of you are offering basically your knowledge base, right? Your expertise in a particular field. And so those are all different placement strategies from a marketing standpoint. And as you build and grow your practice, you're going to pay attention to those placement strategies and what your distribution channels are, because you want to be able to maximize where you're getting the most traction and the most dollar amounts associated with that. So back to pricing. So we have entry level, standard pricing, premium pricing. And we talked about the uniqueness and what kind of commands premium. I could talk about that particular pricing strategy all day long, but what I can say to you is be very confident in what you're charging and why you're charging that. And so a real world example is I had a guy he's still my friend to this day, but he was a client of mine when I was a banker, and he creates a line of hair care products, shampoo. And I helped him get some financing to purchase some buildings for the business. And, those types of deals, they take a long time to really come to fruition. And, 18 months after working with this guy, I'm finally ready for him to sign the loan documents so he can purchase these buildings. And at the last minute, he's like, hey, Bob across the street over there at Wells Fargo is going to give me 1/4 of a point less on my interest rate. And I looked at him like, well, yep, that's Bob, right? But let me ask you a question. Why do you charge what you charge for your product? Because it's a premium price product. It's not the cheapest product on the market. Why do you charge what you charge? And he looked at me and he said, without flinching, he's like, because my product's the best. And I said, uh-huh. And that's why you're going to pay what's on this loan document right here, because you get me as your banker with it, and I'm the best. He gave a little chuckle and he signed on it. We're still friends to this day. And what he was asking for was really insignificant and irrelevant over the grand scheme of what was being created. But that's a true story, right? So be confident in what it is that you're offering and why you're charging that price. We can talk about pricing strategies all day long. One other area that I'll focus on is some of you might do consulting work, say as an example. So your backgrounds in let's say creating a happier workplace as an example, helping employers really create a better mental health space, work environment for their employees. And so maybe that ends up being a consulting offering provided by you, and it's not a one-on-one patient type of deal. And in a consulting structure, typically how we would price consulting is, first and foremost, is you always, when you submit your offer or your bid to the company on what you would charge for your service to consult with them, you always list 3 price points, okay? So the first price point is typically a price point that says, here's kind of the bare bones of what you asked me for. It's gonna get you what you looked for, what you reached out to me for, and the price is X. But there's a tier 2, which includes all that, plus some of these really cool extra things that will benefit you in all these different ways. And they're so enticing that they're hard to pass up. And then you'll have a third pricing tier that's really high priced, and it's the Cadillac version of whatever it is that you're offering. And it's so high priced typically that it's like, well, that's way out of the budget. But man, this middle package now is looking super attractive, right? Because it's not as expensive as the Cadillac version, and it's got all these extra bells and whistles in it. And I really want to make sure that this consulting effort's going to work, and it's going to be the best thing for my team. So I'm going to go to that middle package, right? So those are some strategies around that pricing standpoint. How do you pick the price for that? So if you're doing private practice as an example, you know what your hourly rate is. You charge that hourly rate probably plus some, right? Maybe up to 30% more than what your one-on-one hourly rate is. And then the other way to do that is typically, I do a lot of management and leadership consulting, and the way I structure it is I'll say, okay, I understand what you want me to do here. I can do that. This is how it's going to look. and I know from doing this and doing it long enough, I'm going to save you $1 million in employee turnover, right? The cost of it to turn over an employee, based on the size of your organization and my initial assessment, I think I'm going to save you $1 million in employee turnover. And therefore my rate is a percentage of what I'm saving you, 10, 20% of what I'm going to save you. Or vice versa. Oh, by me implementing this concept that I created as part of my PhD program as an example for employee development within an organization, I'm going to increase your profitability or your revenue stream by $1.5 million, $2 million. Therefore, my rate is 10 to 20% of that. That's very easy for customers to digest in the business space. So that I just want you to kind of pay attention to that. There's a variety of different ways to price your structure, but most of you are going to be in that standard to premium price range. If you're doing consulting, just kind of lean on some of those models I just gave there. The last pricing tier, just so you know, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of pricing strategies and categories. I'm just kind of hitting on some of the high level ones. The last one I'm going to touch on, and I just want you to be aware of it because down the road, this might be something that some of you potentially could take advantage of. Maybe you establish a well-recognized brand. There's a lot of traction in the work that you're doing. The demand for your time and your services is greater and greater. You can potentially charge above a premium pricing strategy. You have a new program that you're rolling out, and the first thing you're going to do is market it to existing customers or people that you've worked with before because you know that they appreciate your work and they've had a lot of success in what you do. So what happens is then you reach out, so the pricing tier above premium is what we would call skimming. And skimming is a technique that's often used in industries where you have a ton of saturation already, right? You are the dominant player typically in a space, and you've reached most of the customers, but they're loyal. They're really, really loyal to what you're doing. So the greatest example of this, and we see this happen every September, right? So Apple comes out with a new phone every September. And whatever that date is where you can actually go purchase that product, you go buy any, AT&T, Verizon store, Apple store, wherever, and the lines are down the block and around the corner. Well, who's in line at those places? Existing iPhone customers who would likely have last year's model, and they're standing in line, texting their friend to tell them that they're in line to get the next iPhone. And what happens with the price of that phone? Now they're like thousands of dollars, right, to buy a phone. But the consumers who are in line do not care because they are diehard brand loyalists, and they are driven by being first to market, right? They're texting their friends, "I'm getting the new iPhone. Haha, you're not getting it." Right? They pride themselves on that, or keeping up with the Joneses, right? Getting anything, that new tech before anybody else. We can charge them whatever the heck we want, and they'll pay for it. And Apple's figured that out, right? And they sell millions and millions of units that way. Then what happens after about 4 months? The sales slow down. And so what happens to the price of that phone? It drops back down to what I say the normal person price is, right? So the rest of us then will say, okay, so now it's not $1,000, it's $600. I'll go out and buy the phone, right? And it sits there for 12 months or whatever the case is, another 9 months for that price at that price point. Then the next one comes out. And so the model that some people stood in line for now sells for $300. Or in some cases, they just give it away to you for free, as long as you upgrade and you increase your service plan or whatever the case is. But price skimming is very effective for what you do. So some of you, as an example, may turn out to be keynote speakers at conferences and events and those kinds of things. You can charge premium prices for that kind of stuff, and when your demand gets really high, you can charge whatever you want. You can create a skim price model that will support the work that you do. Okay, so we have product, we have price, we have placement. So we talked a little bit about placement, right? And we talked placement, again, it's about distribution channels. Where is this being sold? Now, again, you think placement could be, microscopic, right down to like the store shelving example that I gave, right? Alcohol sits on the top shelf if it's premium. Where does cereal sit in the grocery store? Right? Sits on the same types of shelves, but not typically next to alcohol. And you think, well, what's the most premium price cereal? Right? Oh, it's people always say, oh, it's the healthy ones. And where are the healthy ones? They sit on the top, right? It's all the full nuts and grains or whatever the case is. And then you kind of go down the price point and you start to see cereals that are the branding starts to fall off a little bit, right? They're not necessarily as recognizable and the price points are better, right? They're at a better price. But oddly enough, in cereal, it's the exact opposite of alcohol. So the most premium priced cereals are on the bottom shelves because they're right at eye level for children. And children have more buying power than adults in grocery stores. So we're going to make that happen, right? We're going to put cartoon characters on the box and we're going to charge whatever the heck we want because the kid's going to throw a tantrum until you buy the cereal. And that's just how it works. So, kind of effective strategies. But so you say distribution, you would say, well, we're in all the King Supers in the grocery store example, right? And that's a Kroger brand. So they own grocery stores all across the country. So you might be in King Supers and Publix and other groups that they own. That's a distribution channel. But then more specifically, we're on the second shelf from the bottom in this particular aisle or category, right? That's placement, right? So you hear, oftentimes we go into physical stores and you see things on end caps and that kind of stuff. And so when you're thinking about placement for the work that you're doing, like where are you going to be displaying prices? Most of you typically won't display prices until you've had an initial consult with a patient, right? You're not in an industry where we just blast it out and try to beat people on pricing. That's not the work that you do. You consult with the individual first, then you figure out really truly what their needs are, and then you price around that. And that's when you disclose your pricing. But from a placement standpoint, where are we going to make our presence known and where are we going to find potential customers in that space? And that brings us to our next category of the 4 Ps, which is promotion, right? And normally promotion is what people think of when I say, what does marketing mean to you? People always tend to lean towards promotion or advertising, right? Advertising is one type of promotion. Advertising is only one tiny little sliver of marketing, but it's an important one, right? So next week, I'm going to give you a tool on how to kind of develop your promotional strategy and your marketing budget. Okay. But when we talk about promotion, we're talking about where you're getting the word out. And again, for therapists, many of you might collaborate with each other, right? You're in a relatively small corner of the world, if you will, as far as the number of operators that you have in the space. And you typically lean on each other to promote each other. And that's a fantastic thing, right? Well, again, remember my specialization is in this, but my buddy Jim does this, and we can help each other out, and vice versa, right? And that's a true story. Actually, when I was in my early part of my career in the banking industry, I used to go around and build banks, right? Physical retail locations, and then I kind of made a transition, and I went to credit unions, and I would build branches for credit unions, and then I'd manage those branches until they became profitable, and I'd move on. Well, the first thing I would do is I would go as a credit union, I'd open my doors as I'd go over and talk to the manager at the Wells Fargo bank or whatever bank was in the parking lot. Cause it was like, how many banks could you squeeze into a grocery store parking lot? We tried to figure that out. But the first thing I would do is I'd use them as my sales channel, right? So back then banks were not very good at doing car loans, say as an example. They do loans and they have a really kind of focus on bigger businesses. They don't really work with small businesses and they don't typically do car loans. So I would say, and you know what? We're the credit union. We're really great at car loans, but we're not that awesome at big business. So how about if I refer my big business to you and you refer your car loans to me? After the shock and awe wore off, they thought, that's not a bad idea. But within the next day, I was getting customers sent over to me by the banks in the parking lot, right? So use each other as a reference there. Let's see, Charlie. So pricing. So some therapist friends advertise sliding scale pricing. What are considerations? Should that be advertised? And if we want to be available for those who can't afford it at a May price. Yeah, so Charlie, I was talking about this a little bit earlier from a pricing standpoint. Many therapists that are doing sliding scale, the trick is, as a therapist, and this is a hard thing for a lot of the clients that I work with in this space, is the acceptance of either deciding to take insurance or not take insurance. More importantly, their acceptance to say, I'm not going to take insurance. Because once you're in network with an insurance provider and you see a patient that has that insurance, you can't charge them a cash pay rate or a sliding scale or those kinds of things. If they're not in network with a provider that's on your list, then you can charge them whatever you want, right? And most people have a standard rate. And most therapists that do that will charge typically a cheaper rate than what they bill insurances. Somewhat irrelevant, because I know for a fact that insurance companies almost never ever pay full price of what your rate is, which is shameful, but that's the nature of how that works right now. So sliding scale practices typically will be based on a percentage of what somebody's income is, right? That's the most consistent way to do it. So if you work with a client, say as an example, and they only make $30,000 a year, you have a minimum threshold price. I'm making up the dollars, but let's call it $40 an hour, right? Because a typical therapy session is an hour. So that's the minimum. And then for every $10,000 of increment that you make in income, we're going to raise that price by 1 or 2% or something like that. That's a good way to do it in order to create consistency in your pricing, right? Because we want to avoid any kind of bias or things that we have intrinsically as humans, right? Well, the person sitting across from me seems so nice. They have such a beautiful smile. I'm going to charge you this instead of this, right? So we just want to be kind of consistent in that space. That's just a best practice. It's not a hard and fast rule or anything like that. But I would encourage you to build a model that's consistent in that way. The other strategy that I mentioned, Charlie, was if you are taking insurance as an example, but you still want to service a population that potentially can't afford you, is you charge cash pay for appointments 3 or 4 days a week. Build out that schedule so that you have a solid and consistent revenue stream, and then give your services away or at a sliding scale rate on Fridays, say as an example, right? And you can kind of pick and choose, how that works. The goal really for you as therapists is to build a practice to the point where you can't see everybody, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. And the reality is you're going to get there pretty quickly if you implement some of the strategies and some of the approaches I do. The harder thing that I see from therapists is for them to balance it, right? What's pulling at their heartstrings versus what the business-minded side of you should be saying. And, therapists as a group is a group like some other groups that I work with. Business is it's not an area of strength for you, and that's perfectly fine. But it's a necessity at some point, right? So as you know, most of us cannot afford to see patients all day long, every day for $20 an hour, right? You just can't do that, because your $20 an hour equates to about $7 an hour for you in net by the time you finish paying for all your expenses and things like that. And if that was the case, most of us wouldn't have gone to school and gone through all the extensive training that we did to get where we're at today. So there's a balancing act there that has to happen for therapists, from balancing the business side of things and the care that you provide. So again, I'm happy to connect with people one-on-one and chat through some of those challenges and that type of thing. But there are ways around it. So I don't want to sound like all doom and gloom in the industry. And insurance companies could do a better job. They're not necessarily the worst evil on the planet, but it's just something that you have to balance. Well, as you build your practice, as an example, and you'll start to see patients, and I see this very, very frequently. Patients need what I would call wraparound services, right? So typically speaking, you have a therapist, they provide some type of counseling directly one-on-one, and they realize that this patient that's in front of them or the client that's in front of them really needs the support of a social worker, right? That's not your area of expertise, maybe, not what you're necessarily trained in, those kinds of things. So you want to bring in a social worker into your practice, right? That's common and encouraged, right? Because the more that you can build and bring in more people providing more services, you can see more patients, charge more dollars. You start to collect a portion of the dollars that are coming from the other services that are being provided. You can remove yourself away from the patients that maybe aren't as profitable for you based on your level of education and certifications, and spend more of your time with the ones that do. There's a lot of ways to do that. As you build a private practice and you bring more practitioners into the space, insurance companies will reward you for that. So I see this happen all the time. I'm a solo therapist. I see patients one-on-one in my office that I lease out of a space. And I bill insurance and they reimburse me at this rate. And my colleague who went to school with me, has the same certifications, training, everything that I do, they work in a practice that has 7 practitioners. And I've seen their billing, and when they bill the same insurance provider that I bill at the same $250 an hour, they get paid 35% more than I do, right? That therapist and working in the practice typically is not getting paid more, but the practice itself is getting paid more. And the reason why that is the insurance companies just view that as a more stable type of practice, a more well-rounded approach, whatever justification they want to use. But I've seen where insurance companies, same service, same insurance company, same level of skill set, they get paid better through the billing, just based on the size of the practice. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's, again, I see a lot of therapists that are really building something that's solid. Some of you on here are not necessarily doing therapy or counseling work, but you're doing other stuff. I think we have people doing some yoga studios and some other type of health and wellness practice. Stretch Therapist, as an example, is another group that I've worked with a fair amount. They're providing health and wellness services, right? In most of those cases, they take cash pay because the type of service that they're offering doesn't necessarily fall into a traditional bucket of Western medicine that insurance companies support, right? Some insurance companies have gotten better. They pay for things like mindfulness practice and acupuncture and different things like that, and that's great. But not everybody does. So they create these practices, and they only can take cash pay clients because no insurances provide them. But again, we'll talk about this a little bit. Well, I'll talk about it right now because we have a couple minutes. But every industry has what I call a magic number. And I discovered this many years ago in the banking industry when I was building all these banks. And I'd have these banks and they've had these customers doing these kinds of things. And then another bank would open across the street and they'd hang a banner up outside that says, "Come open a free checking account, we'll pay you $50. And then your customers would leave your bank as a customer and go become a paying customer over at this bank that's giving away $50. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to stop that, because $50 is not a life-changing event, right, for most people. And so what's the hook there? And what I did some digging and I did some research, and what I discovered is what I now call the magic number, but every industry has their own number, is what we would now refer to as customer penetration, right? So what I discovered in that process is that if a client in the banking industry had 6 or more products with me, they would not leave me in their lifetime for something like $50 across the street, right? So they have a checking account, a savings account, they have direct deposit, they have an ATM card, they have maybe a car loan with me, a home loan, right? So we get up to 6 products. To them, they're just like, I don't care really how much money you offering to pay me. I'm not going over there because it's a real hassle for me to take all my stuff away. I'm pretty loyal now to this brand of bank, to this particular location. Therapists, as an example, in the health and wellness practitioners, you can get your patients utilizing more than one service from you, you're winning, right? You're building on that brand loyalty that we talked about at the first part of today, and you can start to really benefit from reducing your expense to acquire a customer, right? And get your existing customers in more products and services that you offer. So I offer one-on-one therapy, I offer one-on-one stretching, I offer, one-on-one needling, whatever it happens to be. Oh, but you know what, Sally client, I'm running a workshop on Saturday. You want to come to the workshop? I'm giving a 10% discount for existing customers, right? That didn't cost you anything to have that conversation with that client when they were in your office, and you just got an extra $50 from that person, right? And more importantly, you're offering an additional type of service and support for that individual. Most of you are not going to sell somebody to come to a workshop if the content is not benefiting them in some way or not aligned to the work or the support that they need. So it's a way for you to deepen that penetration and that relationship with that customer. And then that customer who's already happy with your one-on-one services is going to go to a workshop and say, that was amazing. I'm going to tell all my friends about it, because they don't need to come to you for one-on-one, but they're coming to the next workshop, right? So you see how we've capitalized on the relationship with that existing customer instead of going out to pay for new customers. So focus on that, what I would call customer penetration piece. It's going to help you build across that brand loyalty. So as you build a brand or a practice, right, and you start to bring in additional services, you can refer your existing customers to the additional services that you're offering. And that might be the social work example that I gave, right? So you individually are not seeing that client, but a social worker who technically works for you is, and you're collecting 20% of what that social worker is billing out to the insurance company to provide that service. So there's ways that you can kind of layer on different things and approach that. So you should always be looking at a variety of ways to build upon your revenue stream, if that makes sense. Other questions? That was a good one, Charlie. A long-winded answer, but I got there. Okay, I'll hang out for a little bit. If there are questions, I'm happy to take them. I encourage you all to reach out to me individually. I'm going to go back in here and capture some emails and add G. Ramos and Ashante, I think it was, to the the shared folder, and we'll kind of go from there. Next week, we're going to be diving into, again, finding that ideal customer that's a good fit for you. And then we're also going to work through our marketing strategy from a, how are we going to, what's our marketing budget going to be, and which channels are we going to go to in order to acquire the right customers for you. Okay. I'm going to hang out here for a little bit. So if there's any questions, feel free to stick around and ask me, and I'll be here. Otherwise, have a great day and enjoy your weekend, everybody.